Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and we're making a Metroidvania in Unity. In this next little mini-series, we're going to be adding an attack state that will allow us to attack this target dummy and ultimately destroy him in a spray of little bits. In this first video though, we're just going to get our dummy set up with animations and also just make our player ready to receive attack inputs, and we'll set up a sort of dummy attack where we can walk up to the dummy, press a button, and watch it sort of do its thing. Alright, that's where we're headed in this video. Let's get started. So first off, the asset I'll be using here is the free training dummy by Otsoga. It is free for commercial projects, so you can download that one if you like. Just make sure that you're not reproducing it or selling it. Alright, I'm gonna open up my downloads folder, unzip that file, and then just drag the entire thing into my assets. Alright, once we've got it in there, let's head on into the folder. I'm going to be using the armored version as I just plain think it looks cooler. And we've got two here. Let's start with the idle, which will just get set up. I'm going to set it to 32 pixels per unit, point no filter to get rid of any blurring, and 32-bit to preserve the colors. We can then drag it into our scene, and it's pretty little. That's because I should have set it to 16 pixels per unit. Let's apply those changes, and then I can just click him and drag him down here where I want him to show up. Next up, let's just prepare our damaged ones. I'm going to use shift click so I can multi-edit them all at once. Again, we'll do 16 pixels per unit, point no filter, and 32-bit. That said, if you look down here in the corner, you can see that these are set up a little bit funny. They are currently pre-sliced, and some of them are actually sliced to have multiple parts to them. That's not the way we're going to be using them. So I'm just going to set this up as single, and you'll notice that now it just uses the entire space around each dummy, and that's going to work nicely. Now, we want to start our animation. I've already got my animation pane, which I'm going to drag up here, but just in case you don't forget to go to Window, Animation, and Animation to find that. Now, we'll click on our training dummy. Let's name him Training Dummy. We can hit Create. I'm going to go to my Animations folder, make a new folder for enemies, and I'm just going to call this one Dummy Damaged. Okay, we'll shift click all of these and drag them up. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and when I hit play, you can see that it's working, it's just fast. So let's drag this out over around 30 frames or so, and that's going to work okay, except you'll see each of these last for roughly 6 frames, except the last one, which only plays for a single frame before it resets. So let's make a copy of that and paste it so that it also lasts for the same amount of time. Now when I hit play, that looks pretty good, though it's a little slow, so I'm just going to put this a little smaller, more around like 25 frames or so. That's looking much better. You'll notice that he's actually sticking into the ground when we do that. That's a problem. We'll fix it a little later. I just missed it at this point in the video. All right, when we go to our animator, you can see that currently the damaged is actually our default. First, I'm just going to rename this to just plain damaged to keep things simple, but we want to make sure that he idles by default. We don't want any animation at all. So let's create a state, which we can call idle. We'll then right click it and set it as our default. At this point, we want a way to transition back and forth between idle and damaged, so let's just right click and make a transition that goes up, and then another one coming down. Now we just need to know when to actually use those transitions, so let's add a parameter, and this time we're going to create a trigger. We'll call this one isDamaged, and now whenever isDamaged is called, we'll go to damaged. We just want to make sure that it happens instantly, so let's have no exit time or duration. Then, when in damaged, it'll automatically go back to idle with no conditions. We just want to make sure that it has an exit time of 1, so it plays the entire thing, and we can put no duration. All right, the animator's all set up. At this point, we're actually ready to start coding. If we go into our scripts folder, I'm just going to create a new folder to help us get organized, as most of these are player scripts. Let's put all of those, except for the parallax, into there. That'll keep things better organized, and now we can go ahead and create our mono behavior script. This first one is going to be a health script. We're just going to make one health script that can work for anything in our game that has health. It'll take a tiny bit more work to set this up because we're making it so reusable, but it's definitely going to be worth it in the long run. So we can start by getting rid of our start and update method, and let's add the method we are going to be using. We'll have a public void method called change health. Public because we want other scripts to be able to talk to it. We're also going to be passing in an integer for the amount we want to change our health by. Beauty of this is that we can use this both for healing and for damage. Now, in order to have health, we need to actually create a variable for this. So let's make a public integer for health and another one for our max health. Now, whenever change health is called, we'll just take our current health value and add to it the amount passed in. So we'll need to make sure that amount is negative if we want to deal damage. Now we want to have a couple of things that we do here. First of all, let's guard against overhealing. So if some healing number comes in, we want to make sure that if our health gets more than max health, we just set the health back to its max. That'll cap it. We can also get rid of these extra brackets here if we like, as we're going to have a couple of statements here and it'll just keep things more readable. Now we'll add an else if. So if that's not true, we haven't overhealed, and our health is in fact less than or equal to 0, meaning we're dead, we're going to need some logic there. We'll come back to that in a sec. Now let's create our last thing, which is just we want to check to see if damage has in fact been dealt. So we're going to check if the amount is less than 0, meaning we've had damage passed in. If that's the case, then we want to run our damage logic. Now this is the part where things get a little more complicated than your usual beginner tutorial, because since we're reusing health, different enemies or players or whatever are going to respond differently to damage and death, and so we need to account for that. So what we're actually just going to do is anytime death or damage happens, we're just going to send out an event, a message, letting anybody who's listening know that death or damage has happened. It's not going to like that, and that's because we need to add the namespace using system. This will just give our script the libraries for action so it knows what action actually means. So now what we can do is we can come down here, and so if we've died, our health is below 0, we're going to call that on death event, and we'll just send out a message saying, hey, I'm dead. Now in some cases we could encounter a situation where there's nobody listening to this event, and we don't want to get an error then, so we're just going to put a question mark here. That way we'll actually only invoke the event if somebody is listening for it. We'll then come down to our situation here where we are being damaged, and we'll do the same thing, but this time invoking our on damaged event. One last little quality of life event, and sorry, I'm going to add back the start method here. We just want to make sure that when the game begins, our health gets set to whatever max health is. Back in Unity, let's just set up our attack dummy by adding the health script. We can just add max, as in start, it'll fill its health, so we don't need to worry about that. We're also going to need to add a collider so that it can actually detect when it's receiving some damage, and then just edit its shape so that it covers most of him, so that if the player's sword comes anywhere in this, he'll be able to take damage. So since our health script is working for everyone, the actual logic for what to do when damaged or dying needs to be in a separate script. Let's go ahead and create an enemy script here. So for now, this will be a very bare bones script. We'll build this into a full-blown thing later on in our enemy AI series. That said, let's make a reference to our public animator called anim. And now that we can talk to that animator, we need to make sure that we're listening for when a damage call goes out. We're going to do this in onEnable. Here, we want to talk to the health script and get its on damaged event, and we're just going to do plus equals because we're adding a subscription. Now, whenever that event gets called, we want this script to call its own special method called handle damage, which we'll create in just a moment. Now you'll notice it's not having any of that. That's because it doesn't know what health is. So let's make a reference to our health script and make that change in enabled. All right, that's looking much better. Now, while we are subscribing, we also want to unsubscribe. This is just something that will help prevent memory leaks and keep our game running well. Here we want to unsubscribe, so make sure to change that to minus. At this point, we can come down below and create a void handle damage method. This one's just going to be super simple. Whenever damage comes, we want our animator to set the trigger called isDamaged, and actually that's all we're going to do for now. Back in Unity, we'll click on our dummy, add that enemy script, and then just fill in those boxes. So let's drag our health script into health and the anim into there. All right, we're very close now, except that now we currently have no way to trigger this. We need to make it so that our player can actually attack him. And for this video, we're just going to set up a quick dummy attack, which will set us up nicely for the next video. For this, we'll head into our player script. Now, in order for the player to deal any damage, we need to be able to take in his actual input for attacking. So let's head all the way down to the bottom of our script where we've got our move and jump inputs. And we'll add a new public void called onAttack. It'll take an input value just like each of our others. And for now inside, we're just going to simply print a debug message so that we can make sure the input is working. In Unity, let's pop into our assets folder and just open up our input actions here. At the moment, I already have an attack one set. That said, if you don't, you could just hit the plus button on actions to create a new one. Now, if I open up actions, you can notice mine is preset with a whole bunch of options. I'm just going to come down here to this keyboard one. Again, just hit plus if you don't have this. And I like to use the K button as my attack. That just feels good, so I'm going to hit K. At this point, we can go back to the attack header here. And we just want to make sure that it is set as a button, which mine already is. I want mine, though, to actually take in inputs on press and release, as that's going to give us some extra control for combos and things later on. All right, at this point you can save the asset and let's test it. I'm just gonna open my console at the bottom, and now, sure enough, anytime I press K, we're actually getting 2 hits, probably 1 for the press and release, which makes sense. All right, that's pretty good though. Let's pop into our player script one more time and just make this a little bit better test. Now, most of what we're going to do here will not live in our player script long term. However, we will reuse all this logic. We'll just copy paste it into our attack state when we make that in the next video. But for now, let's create a header for attack settings. And in here, we want to make a public integer for damage. We want to give our player an attack range, so we'll use a float for our attack radius, and I'm going to default mine to 0.5. We'll have a public transform, which will be our attack point, so we can make sure that our attack originates where our sword is and not at our player. And finally, we need to know what counts as an enemy, so we'll have a layer mask called enemy. Now, when we come down to our on attack, we're just going to do a little bit of a check. We'll create a collider 2D called enemy. Here, we're going to use a Unity library called Physics 2D, and specifically its overlap circle. Now, this overlap circle creates an invisible circle that looks for colliders, and so here we want this circle to originate at our attack point dot position. The size of the circle will be equal to our attack radius, and finally, what is it looking for? Well, it's looking for anything in the enemy layer. I just typed enemy up above, so I'm just going to pop up there and make sure it says enemy layer, and then come back down again. All right. Now in the very next frame, we'll just do a check. If enemy is not null, meaning if there was something belonging to the enemy layer and we have that collider, then we're just going to talk to it. We'll grab that collider, called enemy, look at its game object, and then check to see if it has a health component. We'll then take that health component and tell it to change its health by whatever our damage is. Don't forget to make this negative here, otherwise you will be healing the enemy instead of damaging it. Okay, that's all the code we need to write, but there's a little setup to do in Unity. And when I open up player here, you can see in our player that we've now got these new variables. Let's do some damage. I'm going to do 3 each time, and then we need to know where our attack point is. I'm going to right click on the player and create an empty, which I'll just call attack point. I'll click on player and drag the attack point in there, and then I'm just going to move the attack point out in front of my player, roughly where his sword attack is going to happen. Now in player, we need to know what layer the enemy's on, but we haven't created an enemy layer yet. So similar to what we did for our ground check, we'll click on our target dummy, add a layer, let's make this one enemy, and then click on our dummy one more time and make sure he belongs to that layer. We can then come back to our player script and make sure it knows that the enemy layer includes enemy. All right, let's test this thing. All right, when I get in the game and press K, he does in fact get attacked, though you'll notice it's happening twice and his damage is actually going down twice. That's because it's happening on press and release. Don't worry, we'll fix that in the next video. That said, you'll also notice that when I attack him again, it only plays once and then it stops working altogether. That's because he's dead. He's run out of health, and so he's not running his damage, he's trying to say that he's dead, and we just don't have any logic for that yet. Also, when I attacked him, you'll notice that he kind of went down into the ground. That's just a little problem I made when we set up his idle state. You'll remember that when we did his regular animations, we set them all as single so that they used the entire space around the target dummy sprite. I didn't do that in our idle sprite. So if we click on that one, it's currently sliced up so that it's not using the whole space. We'll just make it single instead of multiple. And you can see down below now that that white line is gone and it's using the whole space. And when I look in the game now and click on target dummy, and now he should match his damage animation. Much better. That said, if this happens to you, where you click out of here, you go to play and suddenly your target dummy disappears, it could be that your sprite renderer just lost track of that reference. So we'll click on target dummy, go to your sprite renderer, and you can drag him in there. All right, that's a lot of setup, but we now have a working target dummy and we're set up well to get our player attacking. In the next video, we'll get a proper attack state with cooldowns and all of that. Hope to see you in that video. Until then, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.